Hey, good morning, Melanie.
Good morning, my friend.
It's always a hesitation. Why do you always hesitate? Is it just that early in the morning for you?
I didn't notice I was hesitating. I'm contemplating.
Or do you just not want to say good morning? Is that what it
I'm
is?
present. I'm just
It's all good, But for today's conversation, we are going to bring back one of our previous guests, Kerry Riley. And, in a previous episode, we were talking about estate planning and what an estate plan is, how to get started, what it means, all those things. And we decided to bring her back because we want to talk about wills and trusts, which I think more people are familiar with wills. I don't know how many people are familiar with trusts. I know I'm sort of shaky in terms of like what a trust is and how it works and why to have a trust versus a will or how they work together or, all those things. But in preparation for this conversation, I sent you that article that I found on CNBC, and I'll just post it here. And it said, and this is from 2022 for folks who might not see the date. And it said that 70% of Black Americans don't have a will. And we see here, there's a picture of Chadwick Boseman, who was most well known for playing Black Panther. And it mentions that he died without having a will. But then the first paragraph of the article also mentions that Prince and Aretha Franklin also died without wills. And I knew about Prince. Like I knew that he didn't have a will, and that made big news. And I didn't remember if Aretha Franklin did or didn't. I mean, we'll talk a little bit about that as we go further in. I think it was later found out that she had a will, or there was some contesting of the will. But yeah, it was just interesting to see that these celebrities, who you would think would have secured their financial future or the financial futures of their heirs, would have had wills in place.
It really devastates me to hear that about Chadwick Boseman, especially. He knew he was dying, and he had made lots of arrangements for important matters in his life. Even he and his wife working together to create a scholarship fund out of Howard University. So there was so much planning and intentionality. I'm honestly devastated and stunned to learn that he didn't have a will. I just can't even believe it.
Yes, yes. And, just thinking about devastation being stunned. I'm just looking at the article a little bit more carefully now, or I shouldn't say more carefully. I'm looking at it now as we're speaking. And, the headline says, 70% of Black Americans don't have a will. The number they're saying here is that 27.5 of Black Americans have one. So it's actually a little bit more than 70%. And one of the things that you've said to me a couple of times is that we're about to go through this really massive transfer of wealth as the baby boomers pass away, and they provide inheritances to some of the younger generations. And this article is warning that Black Americans are about to miss out on the largest wealth transfer in history because they don't have some of these things in place. And they said that because Black Americans basically have about their median wealth is less than 15% of white families in the US. The fact that, we're not set up, or that Black Americans are not set up to transfer that wealth, means that it's going to be a state of emergency, a financial state of emergency going forward. So, this is a really important conversation to have and for people just to be aware of.
Absolutely. I'm almost without words, honestly, but yes.
Yeah. So, it's for me, I have an old will that I need to update. I'm pretty sure you have a will. But I think just this conversation generally is going to be eye-opening and just really important. So I'm looking forward to bringing our guest back in and, seeing if she has anything she wants to bring in from the previous conversation and seeing how that leads to informing us with this conversation as well.
Yeah. So today's returning guest is Kerry Reilly, estate planner for the 99%. She is with Danger Law in Newton, Massachusetts, and we're delighted to re-engage in conversation with her.
Hey, welcome back.
Hi. Nice to see you both again.
You too. Thank you for joining us again.
Yes.
And, before we talk about today's topic, which is specifically on wills and trust, we had a lot that we discussed with the previous conversation on estate planning. Was there anything that you might have thought about after that conversation that we may have missed or that we should be aware of in preparation for this
Yeah.
conversation?
This topic feels very academic. So when I'm meeting with my clients, I try to use analogies that we all understand and thinking about sort of estate plans in general, especially with now all of the online tools that are being advertised. Um, I like to think of it like putting together something from IKEA. You know, you get this kit and they give you instructions. I don't know about you. I always have parts left over, which is never a good sign. So if I have built myself what I think is a sturdy TV table and I put a very expensive TV on it and I haven't done it right, not only am I now out of table, I'm out of TV. So what was supposed to be like a couple of $100 for a TV table is now maybe a few $1,000s because I got to go out and buy a new TV. So, you know, we think we know what we're doing, but we have parts left over. And, you know, that's never a good thing. So hopefully that lets people think about this a little more practically.
So is it that the will sort of scoops up the parts that are left over, or is it just, are you describing how
Well, I think it's seeking out someone professionally to help you versus the do-it-yourself.
Yeah, because
approach.
because the article we referenced in our first interview made some reference to people. There was a recommendation like at the bottom of that article, which is like, and you can go online and create a will yourself. And
Mhm.
Kerry is no. Here's what could happen if you try to do that yourself. You just
Right.
don't know what you don't know.
Right.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah.
So let's take some of the celebrities that we were referencing. So, you know, Chadwick Boseman and Prince, you know, Franklin. Again, you know, big names, you know, really famous names who had, you know, immense wealth and, you know, who had these estates, who passed away without wills. I mean, is there anything professionally, is there anything that you heard about in the professional world around their death and, you know, what wasn't
Yeah. So Aretha Franklin especially is a great illustration of having nothing and then having a wrong something. So
Hmm.
it was originally believed that she had nothing, in which case the what they call the intestacy or the no will laws of Michigan would have applied. Every state has them. So if we don't write something up, our individual states are going to tell us what happens to our stuff. In her case, because there were no spouses, everything would have gone equal shares to her children. Great. Equal. Love it. So everybody was in agreement. They found somebody to administer the estate. Everybody was happy. Then they found 4 wills. So which one's valid? Is it the last one? Is it, you know, what one? One of them was in a couch. So, and none of those had equal distribution. So her children went from equal treatment to disparate shares. Then the fight started, and then the bill started.
Mhm.
So what was a sad but cohesive family process became a fractious, expensive family process.
Mhm. I'm just thinking back. So, you know, help me figure it out here. So when it comes to that distribution, does a will handle that, or does the estate plan handle that, or is the will just part of the estate plan? Like, how do those two fit together?
Oh, great question. A will is a part of an estate plan, and a will only becomes operative when the person who signed it passes away. So it is only a post-death document.
Okay. Whereas an estate plan can be something that happens when someone is alive.
Right.
Because
That's we've got our healthcare proxy, our power of attorney, and those are living documents.
got
And
it.
a
Okay.
trust can also be a living document.
Okay. Okay. And if someone were to create a will, let's say someone created a will pre-pandemic. The pandemic was in 2020. Let's say someone created one in 2018 and they survived. Should they update it, or how often should a will be updated? Do you
Yeah,
advise people?
Yeah. So the only thing a will does, if you don't have any kids under 18, is distribute your stuff.
Hmm.
So it is a financial distribution vehicle only. So unless you want to change the people or the amounts, the passage of time alone doesn't necessitate redoing it. So in the will, you name someone called a personal representative, formerly known as the executor, and that is the person whose job it is to administer the plan or administer the document. If you want to change that person, if you want to change who gets your stuff and in what amounts, that would be a good reason to change it. But simply because a few years have gone by, no.
So if a person were to have acquired more things, let's say that they're an antique car collector, or they are someone who buys a lot of
Sneakers.
sneakers, sure, sneakers or investment properties, anything. They're a collector of things.
Yeah.
So they made a will, let's say this year, and then in the next couple of years they've acquired more and more things. Should they update the will to reflect that, or does the will sort of automatically account for that?
Great question.
Yeah.
Both. How's that for an awful answer? So a will has a section in it called tangible personal property. And that means are the things that we can touch. So that would be a car, that would be a sneaker, that would be a hard copy music collection. So as we acquire things, we can do something called a memorandum, which is a fancy legal way of saying a list. And you can do that list on your own outside of the legal documents. You don't need witnesses, you don't need notaries. And you can create that list and say this car to this person, these sneakers to this person, this family jewelry pin to this person, the turkey platter to this person. So you can do all of your things in this list outside of the will. Just make sure that you keep it with the will so that somebody can find it when the time comes.
Got it. Got it. Okay.
And but do you treat real estate differently in that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you talk about how as you acquire real property.
Yeah. So my apologies for Property 101, first year of law school class. You can own property, most of us, in one of four ways. You can own it individually. So, Melanie, if you own a piece of property, when you pass away, that becomes part of the estate. If you own it jointly as joint tenants with Derek, it will automatically go to Derek when you pass away. If you and I were married and we owned it as tenants by the entirety, that is sort of a joint tenants for married people. It would again automatically go to the surviving spouse. And this is the tricky one. If your deed doesn't say joint tenants or tenants by the entirety, and it just is Melanie and Derek, you own it as something called tenants in common. And that means you each own a discrete 50%. And that 50% is yours to pass down through your will or through your trust. So property is not a thing that you can put on a list. It's a financial asset that has to be incorporated into the will, the trust, or the deed.
So the difference between spouses is that they collectively own 100%?
Joint tenants and spouses collectively own 100%.
Okay, but in that final scenario, each person
Tenants in common. Tenants in common. Yep.
Okay.
I know. Terrible.
It's I don't think it's a distinction that most people would ever know. So it's interesting to have you explain that to us. Okay. So I think that's a good. And you mentioned will and trust in your final explanation. So
I just add one little footnote onto the tenants in common. When parents own a piece of property and they pass it on to their kids, that is usually how it gets passed on. So imagine if the two of you are siblings and you have a third sibling, imagine each owning a third of a house. So you are tied in with these other two people, but you own your own slice. So that's a way that creates a lot of friction because you have an asset that's your own, but you can't really do anything with it without the other people.
So,
So that's where you get a lot of conflict.
so if our parent had property and died,
Hmm.
they didn't designate how that property should be distributed to us. We inherit it because we're their, I guess you call it, I don't know if you call it next of kin. I don't know what the
Heirs, you'd be the heirs,
heirs.
yeah.
Because we're their heirs, we inherit it, but we don't inherit it with any specific instruction. We inherit it as tenants in common. So
Correct.
we each own an equivalent slice, and then we have to decide what to do with this thing that we own,
Right,
each own a piece of.
right.
But if there were clear instructions, which could be signaled in the will, but I think would need to be more detailed. I'm wondering if that's then where the trust comes into play.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue. Thank you. So, do you want to have your property owned 50% and 50%? It's very hard to sell 50% of something when you don't own 100% of something. So, it's not only does it create friction sort of during the life of the ownership, it's also very limiting on the sale side if both people aren't in agreement.
That's right.
So, something that you can do, and this is something called a trust. So, for your audience who's immediately tuning out now, because sort of like the phrase estate plan, it's like, yeah, I don't have enough money. This can't possibly apply to me. Thanks so much. I'm going to go do this other thing. Um, a trust is simply a lockbox or an in-home vault, however you want to look at it. And it's putting something in the lockbox, and the lockbox becomes the owner. So the two of you could be the trustee of the lockbox, and then you put the deed in the lockbox. So the trust owns 100% of the house, and the two of you can figure out what to do with it. If you want to sell it as trustees, you can do that and then divide up the proceeds according to the terms of the trust. But that way, sort of one thing owns 100%, but the two of you in your capacities as trustees can figure out what to do with it.
But the person who created the trust could also put specific instructions in the trust,
Yeah.
so that the trustees understand what the wishes
Yeah.
were. So, for example, I have a trust. My business is in my trust. My property is in my trust. And my will is just a tiny little, it's
Right.
almost insignificant document as part of my
Yeah.
estate plan.
Yeah.
The real instruction is all in a very detailed trust.
So to that point, and what I say with my clients is think back to Thanksgiving. Your trust is the turkey. So that is that is the main event. That's, you plan the sides around it. Like that's the thing. Everything is supposed to relate back to the turkey. When you're cooking it, stuff falls out and you want to get it back up in the turkey. So you put a pan under it. The will is the pan. So the will is the pan to catch the stuff that falls out. And that type of will, Melanie's literally called a pour over will, because the goal is to take the stuff and pour it back up into the trust.
Mm-hmm.
So the will is important because, again, you don't want Massachusetts or Michigan or anybody else telling you what to do with the fallout stuff.
Yeah.
So you do still want to have a will, but it becomes a supportive document rather than the main event.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So Melanie mentioned that her business is in a trust. And prior to her saying that, I was going to ask, what type of entity is a trust? Is it similar to a business? Is it similar to an organization? Like, so in terms of a structure, how does it equate to something that most people would recognize?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the living or the revocable trust, which is 98% of what I work with my clients, going back to the lockbox. Derek, your name is on the lockbox. Your social security number is on the lockbox. The lockbox is open during your life, and it is simply a container for you to put things in and take things out as you see fit. So you haven't given anything away. You still fully own everything. The lockbox is simply a way to simplify our stuff post-death and keep stuff out of probate. When you pass away, Derek, since you're the one on the cover of the lockbox, that's when it closes. That's when it locks. And Melanie is your successor person, and she has the key and she has the instructions that you've left in the lockbox. And that's all that she can do is what you've told her to do.
It's beautiful, actually. Yeah.
In your experience, where have you seen people go wrong?
All sorts of places. Trusts work to avoid probate only when they are funded. So what does that mean?
Can you also remind our listeners what
Yeah.
probate is?
Yeah. So probate is the process whereby any financial asset or thing worth over $3,000 gets reported to your state and county of residence and gets administered through the court process.
Once you die.
And and probate assets are assets held in singular pronoun names. So something owned by I or me is a probate asset. Something owned we with Melanie or me as trustee is not a probate asset. So if the asset is owned by me and does not have a beneficiary, that is a probate asset. So checking account, yes. Retirement account, likely no, because usually we put beneficiaries on our retirement accounts.
So the state really only has a say in things that are owned by me, owned individually, that I haven't left instructions for.
Either through a beneficiary designation
or what?
or because they are or they are titled in the trust.
Oh, wait. Maybe I missed the.
Yeah.
Let me rephrase.
Yeah,
So
it's confusing. Totally understandable.
Probate gets involved. Probate has a say in my things. If those things are worth over $3,000, they're owned individually by me, and I haven't said who they should go to.
Through a beneficiary designation, or let's go to the IRA, because pretty much everybody's got.
Understand what you mean by beneficiary designation.
So when you set up your IRA, you get all these forms. And one of the questions is, who is your beneficiary? And that means, who do you want to get this when you pass away? So if we put somebody in there, we've said, no, probate doesn't count here.
That's right.
If we haven't put it there, probate does count. So again, we'll look at a checking account. Usually that's not a process to open up a checking account, name a beneficiary. So if I have a checking account in my name only, it's going to go through probate when I die. If I have a checking account, but I've named a beneficiary, either Derek or my trust, it will not go through probate, regardless of how much money is in it.
So like your checking account could be in the name of your trust, and then it's just not involved in it.
Correct.
So do you have to put the checking account? So do you have to go to the bank and say to the bank, okay, I want to add this trust to my account, or can the will handle that?
Again, if we want to avoid probate, that's the will. So will equals probate. So if ideally, yes, you name the account in the name of the trust. Sticking with the checking account, most of us have had a checking account for a really long time. We have all sorts of automatic debits and credits happening in that. If we were to retitle that in the trust, we would have to get a new account number and then reset all of that up again. That's just not going to happen. No one's going to do that. So we can go into Bank of America, Citizens, Eastern, Needham, wherever we bank, and say, I would like to put a beneficiary on my checking account. And if we do that, we take it out of probate.
Got it.
So that's really the most practical solution for that one.
And what I've tried to do practically is, like, all the places say this thing is owned by Melanie Swayze. It's a longer name than that, but Living Trust. And so that's even like city property taxes. If you look me up in the city, you look up my property in the assessor's database at the city of Boston, you'll see that this address is owned by Melanie Swayze's Living Trust. So it's like, nowhere is it something in the name of Melanie Swayze.
That is ideal. Yep, that's ideal, but not always practical. So.
But you try all the different places and ways to do that. So Derek, You have a lot of things you should be putting in a trust.
Not to put me on the spot, not to put me on blast, right? Thanks, Melanie.
So changes. So as I said before, you don't need to change these documents unless you have something material to change. A will is a public document. So every time you change something, you do something called a codicil. And that goes sort of, you just stack it on top of your original will. All of that stuff has to get filed with the county probate court. So if you take me off and put Melanie on some more, I can go look it up and say, how come you took me off?
Okay.
So, and to change a will, you need 2 witnesses and a notary.
Right.
You can do same thing in a trust. It is not public. It does not get filed, and all you need is a notary. So a trust is private. A will is public. A trust is more administratively burdensome to change. A will, excuse me, is more administratively burdensome to change. A trust is not.
Right.
And the estate plan is also private too, right?
Excuse me?
Isn't the estate plan also private?
No. Again, so the estate plan is a will, a power of attorney, a healthcare proxy, and possibly a trust. So the will is a public document. A will is a part of an estate plan.
Estate plan.
So I'm just remembering back to our conversation, and maybe I'm missing a piece here. So I asked near the end of that conversation, so, once the estate plan is done, does it get filed with a county the same way a real estate deed would? And the answer was no, but it's already still somewhere that it can be found. So that's, I guess, where I'm kind of wondering, is it? Yeah, that's why I thought it's not public, given what you're describing.
So an estate plan is 4, possibly 5 documents in total. Only one of those will ever get filed with a court, and that's the will.
Got it. Okay.
And so this is where I get confused about wills, because
I can't imagine why.
Like, okay, you update your will. You're supposed to, of course, have it witnessed, notarized. You do that with your attorney, ideally. But then your attorney is actually filing that publicly. That's the thing.
Not until you die. Not until you die.
So your attorney holds on to all these changes to this document. And then when you die, ideally, the right person gets notified before the state gets involved, and then files that with the state. So this was, my brain goes back to Aretha Franklin, where she had these various versions of documents living in different places, like literally pieces of paper in different places. They all get recovered over time, I guess, as people are cleaning out her properties. And so then how do you know? I guess it becomes a court process to figure out what you're looking at dates, you're looking at that each will might have spoken to different aspects of her financial affairs. So that does get complicated. There's so much about it that's complicated.
Yeah.
And she didn't have a trust.
Right.
Which blows my mind.
Yeah.
Utterly.
Yeah. It's intellectually, absolutely. Emotionally, I 100% get it, because I followed that case very closely as well. And I think this was a similar case with Prince. They had really been bleeped by business attorneys.
Jesus.
So they did not have an innate trust factor with the profession in general. This is a super, super personal, emotional set of exercises and decisions. So again, Prince, I believe, had some massive issues with business attorneys, as did Aretha. So I absolutely get that it did not endear the profession to them to the point where they would want to do something. So it's very hard to work with people to say, we have to move you through that. Otherwise, it gets uglier and more expensive, because their fears and their anger are based in absolute legitimate circumstances and occurrences.
And then so you think about Black people broadly, right? And relationships with institutions. And yeah.
So we only have you for a few more minutes before you have to go, Kerry. Can you, similar to what you told us with estate planning and how people can sort of generally get started, how would you recommend people sort of generally get started with wills and trusts?
So it's overwhelming, especially if you've got young kids and you have to think of caretaker decisions on top of the financial decisions which is not really a part of today's conversation. If you are feeling overwhelmed about who you do want to be involved in this process and how you do want to divide up your stuff, flip it around. Most of us are pretty clear and can document pretty quickly who we don't want. So are there people in your world who you absolutely don't want knowing your business or administrating your business? So make a no way list. And then see who's left. It may be a very short list. So as I say, sometimes it's easier for us saying, I do not want that person knowing my business or taking care of my business. And you may have a very short list left on the other side, and you're already started. I would also ask you to think about this in something that you've probably already done for somebody else multiple times. So most of us have a boss, and most of us have coworkers. Would we go away on a vacation and just turn off our computer and just walk away and leave the desk on the desk? Or do we write up a really detailed memorandum for our coworkers to say, if this person calls, do this. I've got this going on. If this happens, go to this person. So we write up this massive set of instructions because we want our coworkers speaking to us when we get back from our vacation. We don't want them angry with us. So we've already done that for like a 3-day weekend for our coworkers. So you know how to do it. Let's just do it for your stuff. So let's just write your out of office memo.
That's great advice. That's great advice. And I like how you keep it very simple, very put into layman's terms that way. All right, Melanie, do you have any final questions or thoughts?
Trust.
Thank you. The check's in the mail.
Yeah, man. I like power. I like to have a sense of, we're never in control of all things, but things that you can have a sense of control over and manage. That's my MO. That's my focus.
And privacy. Trust means privacy.
Privacy and control. So it's your container. It's your box. You get to decide what to put in, take out, when, rearrange things. And over time, you do develop the kind of intimacy with your attorney and the people who would be the ones following your instructions to say, you know what, this thing is changing in my life right now.
Yeah.
I need to rethink how I want to handle that in a few years, whatever. So it is a living document. It's a living container, and that's special. That's important. You're thinking about yourself now. You're thinking about yourself in the future, and you're thinking about what you leave behind and how people get to benefit and enjoy it without any drama.
Mm-hmm.
And a drama-free life, and I guess in this case, a drama-free death.
Yeah.
And post-death are all important.
And part of Black freedom, which is what we're talking about on the show. Is like, what if you could do things without being spun into chaos?
And without spinning other people into chaos as well.
Well said.
Yeah.
And as you could not do anything if you say, well, I want stuff to go to my kids equally anyway. So if that's what the state law says, that's fine. I will say, just to give ballparks, to do a full estate plan, including a trust, for my firm, a median price is about $6,000, and that's for all of the documents. A probate, on average, regardless of how much money we're talking about, runs $7,500 to $10,000.
And someone has to come up with that money to pay
that comes out of your stuff, like your accounts, your real estate.
You don't have enough stuff when you die to even cover that expense. I literally don't know.
It's a problem. Then you have to get declared insolvent.
Yeah. Yeah.
So as I say, it's sort of pay now or pay later. And that's in today's dollars. So both of those things are only going to go up.
Things to think about for sure.
And if you have any property, think about a trust. Like, it's just do the thing. Build it into the cost of owning property. Gonna have a trust, gonna put my stuff in it, make it very clear.
All right. It's part of your portfolio. It is the portfolio, basically. Yeah. Okay. Lots of good food for thought. Thank you again so much, Kerry.
You look exhausted.
I mean, these are not easy conversations.
No,
These
they're
are
not. They're not.
And in the course of creating my portfolio and creating the plan that I'm now living and doing these other things, these conversations have kind of always run behind the scenes or in the background or on the side. People are like, oh, what do you think about a trust? And I'm like, I don't think about a trust.
Yeah.
But now that I don't have much else to think about right now, I will be thinking more about trust and wills and estate plans. I mean, I have the will, but the other pieces of it's like, okay, I should probably start pulling these things together better. So yeah, it's a lot to take in. It's kind of exhausting, but I also recognize the importance as well.
Yeah.
And think about the wealth transfer. The bigger picture context is the more instruction we give, the more likely we're able to ably hand off our resources. And honestly, statistically, white people have that figured out.
Well, to that point, actually, caring.com every year does a survey on how many people do estate plans. And since COVID, we are now under a third for the entire adult population, 35 and older.
It is.
So it's a thing.
But statistically, Black folks are much lower. And if you think about, again, the wealth transfer that we're in, this period is underway right now. Baby boomers are passing on or going into, assistive care and handing over their properties, selling their properties, and, having people in their family inherit their properties. There was a process by which that's happening. And we just want Black folks, people of color, to be informed enough for just at least basic protocols to play out in our benefit.
And let's also remember, yes, it is the baby boomers who are reaching that age where they will be thinking about this in greater numbers, but Gen X is getting up there too. We're no spring chickens. We've got 3 generations alive behind us.
And Derek, say this with love. I think that about you. You're 50,
Oh man, I think it's time to end this episode.
I'm older, Derek, and I'm in Gen X too, so don't worry about it.
But on several properties. So this is important.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, Melanie. Yes, everyone. I'm agreeing with Melanie. This is important. And now it's time to end this episode. If you like this episode or any others, please like and subscribe. If you have any questions, please leave them in the message place wherever you're watching. And please join us again for the next episode of the Black Lining Forum. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you both.